Will Howard might have just played himself out of Pittsburgh. Just about a month ago, Will Howard looked like a legitimate candidate to become the Steelers' backup quarterback at QB2. Even last week wasn't bad for him. He went 7 of 9 for 86 yards in his preseason debut. But then this game, Pittsburgh gave him the entire first half against the Jets. And it went pretty terribly. He went 10 of 15 for 74 yards and 2 interceptions, which is a 38.6 passer rating. Those interceptions came while Pittsburgh was diving into Jets territory. But here's the thing. I don't think Will Howard's actually just a terrible quarterback, but Will Howard could actually be the odd man out in Pittsburgh's 4-quarterback room. To understand why this game matters so much for Will Howard, you have to understand the situation that he's in. The Steelers currently have 4 quarterbacks: Aaron Rodgers, Mason Rudolph, Drew Aller, and Will Howard. Rodgers obviously isn't going anywhere. Mike McCarthy really likes Mason Rudolph as his backup quarterback, and Pittsburgh drafted Drew Aller in the 3rd round this year. And then there's Will Howard, who was a 6th round pick in 2025. So Howard entered the preseason needing to prove that Pittsburgh had a reason to keep him. And initially he was doing that. Against Green Bay, Howard completed 7 of 9 passes for 86 yards. And McCarthy actually praised the way Will Howard responded in that game. So coming into the Jets game, this was a huge opportunity with Mason Rudolph not playing. This was Will Howard's opportunity to show the coaching staff that he was indisposable. For one game, it looked like that he might. Against the Packers, it wasn't like a ridiculous performance against a starting defense, but it was exactly what you needed to see from a young quarterback. He looked poised and controlled out there, and he definitely avoided mistakes, which he didn't do this week. While Drew Aller went 10 for 13 with 153 yards against the Packers with 2 passing touchdowns. Both quarterbacks looked pretty promising, and that's what made the Jets game so important. Because against the Jets, Will Howard looked completely different. Pittsburgh lost 17-0. Howard started and played the entire first half this time. He completed 10 of 15 passes for only 74 yards and 0 touchdowns. But unfortunately for him, he had 2 interceptions with a 38.6 passer rating. And 2 of those interceptions came while Pittsburgh was driving into Jets territory. The crazy part is, the Jets went the entire 2025 regular season without recording a single interception. They were the first team to not record an interception since the NFL started tracking them in 1933. And Will Howard comes to the second preseason game of 2026 and throws 2 of them in a half. Now obviously just a preseason game. The Jets technically hadn't recorded a regular season interception since week 18 of 2024, so that stat needs a little bit of context, but it's still a crazy graphic. Now here's where I think the conversation gets a little bit more interesting. Drew Aller didn't light the Jets on fire by any means. He finished 11th of 23 with 110 yards, and Pittsburgh didn't score a single point. So if you look at the box score, you can say Aller wasn't very good either. But the box score doesn't tell the entire story. Aller had several passes that were catchable but weren't completed because of the drops by the wide receivers. Most of those receivers won't make the team. He also had a 39-yard completion down the sideline. He wasn't able to get to his first read for the majority of the game, and that's the fault of probably the receivers. But most importantly, he didn't turn the ball over. The offensive line wasn't doing either quarterback many favors. They were pretty terrible throughout the game. They allowed 4 sacks. So I'm not going to say Drew Aller played some incredible game, because he didn't. But as a rookie, he showed flashes enough that Pittsburgh can still feel good about him. Then there was the final drive. Aller drove Pittsburgh down the field and eventually got the offense into the red zone. The Steelers weren't able to finish the drive with points, but the difference between the performances actually matter. Aller didn't have a great game, but he gave the offense a chance to score in the end. Howard's 2 biggest drives ended with interceptions. And that's a completely different feeling for a coaching staff when you're trying to decide which young quarterback deserves a roster spot. And those little differences actually matter. But honestly, Will's biggest problem might not even be Drew Aller. It was probably Mason Rudolph. Because Rudolph didn't even have to play the game. Somehow, he was probably the biggest winner of the entire night. This is where I think Will Howard's situation becomes a little bit concerning. It's not that Pittsburgh thinks he's a 3rd round rookie with upside, while Will Howard is a 6th round pick who had a very good preseason game and then another bad one. They only have 53 roster spots for the season, so Pittsburgh has to decide whether to keep a 4th quarterback is worth it. And if they don't want to keep 4, then someone has to go. And it looks like Will Howard is leading in that spot. And here's the part that can ultimately doom Will Howard. Pittsburgh just straight up doesn't need him. And that's a brutal thing to say about a young quarterback, but look at the roster. So what exactly is Will Howard's argument for taking up that 4th quarterback spot? Potential? Sure. But Drew Aller also has potential too, and experience, that's Mason Rudolph. And from what we've seen, he can't give much NFL production, not yet. And his biggest selling point is he had one good game followed by a terrible one. And that's not a good position to be when the coaching staff has to make a 53-man roster soon, and the Steelers even want to keep him. And that's why I think Will Howard might be in some serious trouble. Not because he's some terrible quarterback, not because 2 interceptions automatically make you a bust, but because everything around him is starting to work against him. The veterans playing well, the high draft rookies playing good, and his starting quarterback is already well established this season. And Will Howard just had the worst performance out of the 3 quarterbacks competing for those backup developmental spots. Now Pittsburgh has to make a decision soon. Do we keep 4 quarterbacks and sacrifice another roster spot? Or do we cut Will Howard and bet that we could develop Drew Aller? And after what happened against the Jets, I don't know if Will Howard gave them a good enough reason to choose him. He still has another opportunity to change the conversation, but if he doesn't change it, We could be looking at the end of Will Howard's time in Pittsburgh before his NFL career ever even got started. And the scary part for Will Howard is if Pittsburgh decides to move on, this isn't necessarily going to be an easy situation for him to recover from. He would go from a player the Steelers draft and develop to a quarterback looking for a new organization before ever taking a regular season snap. And teams may see the same thing that Pittsburgh is looking at. Why didn't the Steelers trust him? Because it's one thing to be a 6th-round pick who needs time to develop. And it's another thing when a team that drafted you has a veteran they trust, a rookie they invested in, and potentially doesn't think you're even worth the roster spot. That's the part that makes the situation so dangerous. Howard still has the physical tools, he has a college resume, and is still only entering his 2nd NFL season. But the NFL doesn't wait forever for potential.